Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. This is video number 2 on the Truth series. So in this video, we are going to talk about the value, purpose, and sacredness of women. Basically the dignity of women. This is something that I feel has really been dragged through the mud. And any section on attracting men, when we want to talk about truth, the number one thing is you need to understand the truth of yourself as a woman. You have a certain dignity. Our society doesn't really recognize that dignity in the way that it should. We talk about empowerment and giving women rights, but we often do not give women the credit they deserve in certain other areas that are actually key to their dignity. And I'm going to talk a little more about that when I say, let's discuss what is the purpose of a woman? Why are women here? Have you ever thought about that? We often think like, why am I here? Sometimes these are very deep existential questions. Why am I here? What is the purpose of life? And so the purpose of life, I'm Catholic. I was always raised believing that the purpose of life, that there is a God, and the purpose is to know Him, to love Him, and to serve Him. And so when you kind of look at that though, as a woman, there is a different slant to that. And so if you really think about it, this is something that I think it's always hard to define. What is the purpose of a woman and what is the purpose of a man? Because we're people. We're not really like something to be utilized. When you say, what is the purpose? Even the question itself is a little weird. But if you think about it, at least in my opinion, and I could be wrong, but in my opinion, the purpose of a woman is to bear life. It doesn't have to be biological. Women were there to bear and restore life. We're healers, we're nurturers. We like things that are alive, plants, pets, people. We like things that are alive, we like life, and we like to give life to things. We like to grow things. Women are often gardeners. We like to grow plants. We like having children. We like bringing life into the world. That is a very beautiful part of womanhood, and that is also part of our dignity, but we'll get into that later. The other purpose of women, in my opinion, is it's to there's a book, it's called like The Education of Women. It was an old 1800s book, and it was about like schooling for girls. And in that book they said women weld the links between heaven and earth. And I really do think that part of the other purpose of women is to connect heaven and earth. Women are we are more interested in things that are not quite as mechanical as men. And that in itself, there's something spiritual about life. This is why women are often more interested in like the occult or, psychics or paranormal or like, spiritualism. Women can often go down that path because as women, we are more in touch with the unseen side of life. This is why women are more oriented toward religion. It's been said that women are more religious than men. And to a large extent, that's true. Women are often very receptive to the idea of there being some kind of a higher power, there being some kind of purpose to the things that happen to us. Men tend to be practical and they tend to want to rely on their own strength. But women are more, we have a better sense of things that kind of happen behind the scenes in life. And that is the nature of women. We connect heaven and earth in the best of women. A true woman does that. We see this in the Virgin Mary. This is why she is often hailed as such a role model in Catholicism, because Our Lady, she did both these things to a great degree. She bore life and Christ. She gave birth to Christ, so she bore life. And secondly, she connected heaven to earth. In giving birth to Christ, she brought heaven into earth in a way, So as women, those I think are two very big purposes we have, if you could call it that. And I think as a woman, we have a certain sacredness, There is a bit of what I think is a myth on YouTube and a lot of like femininity channels and accounts. They'll talk about the divine feminine, the divine divine feminine energy or whatever. And we're not divine, okay? Like divine comes from the word, divine is related to the word divinity, which is about God, godlike. Often we will talk about, goddess energy. And I see what they're saying. I would counter that a little bit, and I would say, yes, there's something sacred about women, but I would not say divine. It's a slight twist there, because again, divine refers to being godlike. We are not gods. We can do a lot, we can have a big impact in the world, but we are not gods. A man is not supposed to worship you in a godlike way. We are creatures, we're fallen, we have limitations. The nature of a god is that it has no limitations. That's why there can only be one god. How can there be multiple gods? Their limitless power would bump into each other. So a god, by definition, a being that has limitless power, that necessarily kind of shows that there can only be one God. And so human beings, obviously, we're limited. So I don't think it's accurate to say the divine feminine, because I think that can have some connotations that'll kind of steer you wrong a little bit. However, what I think people, when they are talking about that, I think what they're getting at is they want to play up the sacredness of a woman. I think it's a reaction to the banality of life. We tend to treat women in a very utilitarian way. We are often seen as, unfortunately, we're often seen as kind of like sex objects or cheap labor. We're meant to be in the workplace, you should have a big career, or you should be super hot. Those seem to be kind of like the two extremes that women are expected to fall into. Either you be some career woman, or you're supposed to be really hot and beautiful. And oftentimes the expectation is that you do both those at once. So that in a way cheapens a woman. And I think when people talk about the divine feminine, it is a reaction against that. We want to bring a certain dignity back to womanhood. There is a dignity and there is a sacredness. However, let's think about where that sacredness comes from. And it comes from the ability to bear life. When you conceive, there is something miraculous about conception. A new human being is formed, and it has a soul. And that soul comes from God. The soul is spiritual. It doesn't come from your cells. That energy, that life force that animates a body and makes it different than a corpse, that is not something that, we can control. That's why a lot of women, you end up having to do these infertility treatments, because conception is not something we can control. And it is something that God controls, You can get eggs and sperm and put it in, these infertility clinics. They take eggs and sperm and they try to get it to conceive, and then they implant it back in a woman. And God is the one who controls whether that embryo forms. And so as a woman, when we conceive, in a way, God kind of touches the woman and puts that soul and sparks that life into those cells and turns it into a baby, an embryo. And there's something miraculous about that. And in a way, like I said, God touches the woman. There is in a certain sense, he touches the woman to do that. And that is something that men don't experience, Men definitely cooperate, but they cooperate with a woman. They cooperate with a creature to create a child. A woman is cooperating with two people. She's cooperating with the man, obviously, and she's cooperating with God. She's leaving herself open to life, or she should be, and then God has a chance to work through her and create that new human being, that new human life. And that is where her sacredness comes from, because sacred means set apart for something holy. Anytime God is involved, there's a certain holiness there, because God is holy, and that's where that sacredness comes from. It is because of that cooperation with God that a man doesn't do. And there is something special about that. That is why the female body has a certain dignity to it, and it's to be respected. That's also why it's accurate to say that a woman kind of brings heaven to earth. She's kind of that connector between the two, because again, as a good example, we see this in conception. She's, on the one hand, she's working with the man, so there's a connection there, and then she's also connecting with God, because God is putting the soul into this child So she's kind of literally the link between the two. And that's also why I say that, one of the purposes of a woman in a biological as well as a symbolic sense, because not every woman is going to have children. And, you can still bring God into life and a certain dignity into life, whether you have children or not. But that's why I say that, because she's a link between the two worlds, and there is a sacredness to that. However, if you are not going to be open to life, then there is no basis for, like we see in the world today, there is not much value given to motherhood. The ability of a woman to literally grow a new human being in her body is something that our society just kind of tramples underfoot. And so because of that, that removes the basis, the reason for viewing women as sacred. If you're not going to value that as a society, then yeah, woman's not, how is she sacred? She's not really different than a man, Obviously, every human being has a certain specialness and dignity to them, but women in particular have a special dignity. And that's also why when you talk about this like divine feminine, what is the basis of it? Some of these courses in femininity, because I do a lot of research in this area. I love talking about this. This is my passion. And there are places that talk about the divine feminine, and there are channels and videos, but these women don't actually talk about the foundation and the cause of that sacredness, or that divinity, so to speak, that they want to call it. They don't really outline, well, this is why we think women are divine. It's just assumed. And that's why I'm saying it's not a divinity, it's a sacredness. It's a little different. A creature cannot be divine, but a creature can be sacred. Sacred means set apart for something, holy and spiritual. You can set apart a creature for something for that. And so that's what I'm saying with this ability to bear life. And it's also in a symbolic sense, because obviously if a woman, let's say she has, health problems and she can't bear children or whatever, that doesn't mean she's no longer sacred. The symbolism is still there. And so that's why I'm saying that ability to bear life, that is the source of this sacredness. So if you take that away, there's not really any foundation to it. So food for thought. This dignity of a woman, this is why you are not the toy of a man. This is why our norms about sexuality are way off. We kind of have this attitude that, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's exercise, or it's a way to pass the time, or it's just something fun to do, or it's a need people have. Sex is where we get life. This is where we get human beings. This is not, I think men have gotten a little entitled about this, and so they lose sight of the dignity of a woman because they kind of just see her as something to enjoy. If you're going to view sex as exercise, well then a woman just kind of becomes like the treadmill that you do the exercise on. And that's not appropriate, that's not accurate. And so as a woman, it's important that you be aware of your dignity. Again, you don't want to go overboard and view it as divinity. You're still a creature, you're still human, you have limitations. But at the same time, you are sacred. There is something special about you. Sex is a gift. You having children, that is a gift. That is a very special thing that women can do. It should be honored and respected. And it's very sad that in our society we don't honor and respect it, but it is what it is. So yeah, and when we talk about the truth of things, the number one truth you want to keep in mind is that you have the ability to bear life. You have a dignity because of that. And men should respect that dignity, and you should insist on being treated with dignity. So always remember that.